Top 10 Strongest Quirks. Quirks are the beating heart of My Hero Academia's world building. They are what gave rise to a society in which professional heroes are both the public defenders and its celebrities. But with the vast array of quirks we see in action throughout the series, it's hard not to realize that not all quirks are created equal. And that begs the question, of the dozens of quirks we know so far, which are the most powerful? To answer that question, we will be looking at the raw power of the 10 strongest quirks as well as their versatility, effectiveness, and the skill of the wielder. Which will come out on top? That's what we're about to find out. Number 10. Permeation. First up in the countdown is UA High 3rd year Mirio Togata's quirk, Permeation. This quirk, which allows Mirio to become intangible, elevated him to the 3rd year class's vaunted Big 3, and for good reason. It allows him to pass through and catapult himself off of solid objects, a skill witnesses often liken to teleportation, and avoid attacks, letting them pass through his body. With both offensive and defensive uses, Permeation is a versatile quirk that he can use in a wide range of situations. It is also a very effective quirk. One of the key skills Mirio had to master to use Permeation in combat was the ability to precisely control which parts of his body are intangible at any given moment, and that makes his attack nearly unavoidable. For example, Mirio is able to use misdirection to land hits on an opponent by distracting them with a feint with an intangible part of his body while landing a hit with a tangible fist, something most opponents try to counter but few actually can. In another attack, he catapults himself out of solid surfaces in quick succession to land a lightning fast blow on his target before they even know what hit them. Because these attacks happen extremely fast and not entirely in the enemy's line of sight, they are incredibly hard to predict and counter. And since he can make any enemy attack pass through his body, it's just as hard to fight back. However, the skill of the wielder is what makes Mirio's Permeation such a powerful quirk. As Mirio says, it's strong because he made it strong. Why? Well, for one, mishandling the quirk could split him in half. And there's also the fact that training with Permeation is a less than pleasant process. When he's using his quirk, Mirio can't sense his environment or feel anything except the sensation of falling. Because of this, training himself to phase through solid mediums took years of trial and error. Also, moving through solid objects requires a sequence of steps that have to be executed extremely quickly in order to let him pass through. Mirio claims that the only way to learn how to execute these steps effectively is through painstaking practice, since he has to be able to predict his environment to pass through it. And practice he did, dedicating himself to learning how to handle his quirk well enough to become a hero from a young age. Thus, Mirio's quirk is only as noteworthy as it is because of the time and effort he has invested in mastering it. But the upshot of that is that he's recognized as one of UA's strongest hero trainees, with Class 1A even going as far as to calling him invincible. So though Permeation loses points for being so hard to control, it is in the top 10 by virtue of its potential and effectiveness. It's telling that the only major loss we have seen Mirio suffer thus far wasn't because of his own lack of skill, but because he gave up his quirk to protect Eri from a quirk-destroying bullet. Number 9. Compress. Coming in at number 9 on our list of the most powerful quirks is one whose user is decidedly less heroic, Compress. Belonging to a villain by the name of Atsuhiro Tako, or his alias Mr. Compress, this quirk lets the user shrink anything he touches. We first see it in action during the League of Villains raid on UA's Force training camp, when he uses the ability to compress Bakugo in a marble-like sphere to help the League kidnap him. That's one of its major uses, compressing people into lightweight portable spheres, rendering them easily transportable and incapable of continuing to fight. However, it's a little more versatile than just that. Mr. Compress is able to use it in self-defense as well, shrinking himself to get out of his restraints when Best Jeanist puts him in a tight bind during the Paranormal Liberation War. He can use his marbles like Mario Kart tortoise shells, concealing large objects like boulders within, and then throwing them into the paths of moving objects who trip them up. But perhaps its deadliest application is to individual parts of the body, by which Compress can be used to maim the opponent as well. We see this when Compress shrinks Chisaki's arm into a marble, immediately severing the limb. That versatility is admirable, but the category it really stands out is in its efficacy, how hard it is to counter. You can't escape from one of Compress's marbles, and they are small enough that if he throws one in your path, you probably aren't even going to see it soon enough to dodge. And that's saying nothing of the terrifying things he can do to a person's body. Compress is sort of a strange quirk, but Mr. Compress has definitely figured out the most effective ways to utilize it. Really, its only major drawback is that he has to be touching something to compress it. That's a pretty big limitation though, so Compress stays near the bottom of the list, below quirks that require significantly less extenuating circumstances to use. But you know what even Mr. Compressed can't shrink? The amount of awesome plot armor content you could be the first to see when you subscribe to the channel with notifications on to never miss an upload, and smash that like button. Number 8. Brainwashing. Unlike Compressed, not all quirks with villainous potential are used that way, and a perfect example of such is UA first year Hitoshi Shinso's Brainwashing. A general studies student whose quirk kept him out of the hero course, Shinso possessed the ability to brainwash others into doing his bidding with his voice. It only works when they respond to him though, so he has a support item called Artificial Vocal Cords, a voice modifying device that allows him to imitate others' voices and trick them into responding so he can activate his quirk. And after intense training, he is now able to give orders that require complicated cognitive processes like making someone talk. It's not hard to imagine why Shinso's peers often fear him with a quirk like that. As long as he can get his target to respond to his words, Shinso can order them to do just about anything he wants. He could sneakily use his artificial vocal cords to sow infighting among a group of villains, compelling them to take each other out before he has to lift a finger. He could order an opponent to walk into the middle of the street or off a cliff. He could even use his brainwashing abilities to help his hero allies if one became distracted. If something was keeping a fellow hero from fighting at full throttle, brainwashing them might let that person tune out distractions and carry out their plan effectively. The versatility and efficacy of a quirk like that are staggering, and more than enough to convince me that UA is lucky that Shinso wants to be a hero and not the villain people tend to assume he is. However, Shinso's quirk is not unstoppable. Like I mentioned, the person he is trying to brainwash has to respond to him for Shinso's quirk to work, so it's sort of up to the target whether or not he'll succeed. That is a big if. It's also limited in range as the target has to hear him to reply, and he probably cannot project his voice all that far. Additionally, a physical shock can break Shinso's brainwashing. We see that when Deku is able to free himself from Shinso's control by breaking his fingers at the sports festival. Those are definite drawbacks, but they don't subtract from the flexibility of Shinso's quirk, and that potential warrants a spot among the strongest quirks in the series. Number 7. Acid. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Acid? Seriously? But hear me out. Class 1A student Mina Ashido might not get too much spotlight, but her quirk is seriously dangerous. Acid is just about what it sounds like. Mina can create and secrete corrosive fluid. I don't know about you, but if I were a villain, that's just about the last quirk I would want to run up against. Melted by acid? Not a great way to go. But it's not just the terrifying hypothetical of being on the receiving end of it that gets acid a spot on this list. Mina's got a pretty wide variety of uses for her quirk. She can create a wall of it to block projectiles, shoot bullets with it at an opponent, and even cover herself in acid to protect herself from any attack that comes her way. If she wants to throw something, she can use her acid to make a surface she can spin on and greatly increase the force of her throw. Her quirk is a solid mix of defensive and offensive uses that give it points for versatility. It earns points for efficiency too, because like most other quirks on this list, it's pretty much unstoppable if it lands. We have yet to see anything her acid cannot dissolve. So as far as we know, it's game over if it touches opponent or, well, just about anything. But it's got a couple of significant limitations. Firstly, although Mina's skin is naturally resistant to corrosion, it's possible for her skin to lose its resistance if she uses her acid too much, a weakness she works on throughout the series. She also has trouble using her quirk on humans since she can't easily control the corrosiveness of her acid. These are both shortcomings in the skill category that she works to overcome, which hold this underrated but terrifying quirk back from a higher place on this list. Frankly though, if Mina ever ironed out those issues with training, she would be a truly daunting hero to face in combat. And as far as I'm concerned, let's be thankful that Toga is not in love with her, because seeing that quirk in a villain's hands would be insane. Number 6. Overhaul. Chisaki, better known as Overhaul, is one of My Hero Academia's most chilling villains, and his quirk is no small part of that equation. His quirk, from which he takes his villainous alias, is able to disassemble and reassemble anything, be that an object or even a person. He can use his ability to reshape his environment, either to trip up his opponent or avoid an attack, or even disassemble an adversary. This versatility lets him attack at a variety of ranges and counter a number of attacks, an advantage that's bolstered by his tactical intelligence and ability to strategize on the fly. Coupled with the fact that he has literally no objection to brutally murdering and reviving people for his own ends, there's very little holding Overhaul back from using his quirk to the dastardly peak of his potential. However, all of the skill, power, and remorseless brutality he could muster weren't enough to prevent Overhaul's defeat or the loss of his arms. Because his quirk factor was contained in his arms, that defeat rendered him functionally quirkless, bringing Overhaul's reign of terror and the ability that enabled it to continue to an end. This was a tricky one to rank because his potential as a quirk is insane, but it still wasn't enough to guarantee a critical victory. The fact that he couldn't hold on to his quirk at the end of the day is a pretty big knock, and that keeps it just outside of the top 5. Number 5. Erasure. There are few things more hair-raising in a quirk-based hero society than one that can erase other quirks, and that is exactly what Class 1A Homeroom Teacher Eraserhead's Erasure can do. It's a pretty straightforward ability. He can erase a person's quirk by looking at them. That's it. However, he can also hold multiple people under erasure at once, and they don't have to be looking directly at him for the quirk to remain in effect. That may not sound like much, but many quirk users are unable to hold their own in a battle without their quirks, and because it can nullify them, erasure is one of the most damaging quirks a villain can face. Its versatility is pretty low, but he doesn't really need it since his effectiveness and his skill with his quirk are both so high. Just think about how many characters have little to no combat skill outside of their quirk. What are they going to do if they face an opponent who can stop them from using it? For a lot of villains, the only possible answer is accept defeat. And if it didn't have limitations or drawbacks, it would be pretty rare for Eraserhead to come across an opponent he couldn't easily subdue. That said, Erasure comes with a lot of downsides. For one, it isn't very useful in combat on its own. As such, he has to use a supplementary fighting style called the Binding Cloth technique to compensate for his quirk's lack of defensive uses. It's also ineffective on mutant or body morph quirks, which is problematic against heteromorphic opponents. Aizawa also can't blink while using his quirk, and because his hair stands up while his quirk is active, it is hard to use it stealthily. To compensate for that obvious tell, he wears goggles so it is harder to pinpoint who he is looking at. In addition, Eraserhead isn't as good at facing multiple assailants as he is at one-on-one or stealth missions, and that results in a couple of incredibly rough defeats throughout the series. 2 of those have severely impaired his ability to use his quirk. After the USJ incident, his quirk stamina decreased, and he could no longer use it for as much time at once. And after the loss of an eye during the war arc, he can barely use it at all. Sadly, this once formidable quirk is now almost useless without outside help. That said, it is still usable, and as we are going to see in a few more minutes, Aizawa is now the guardian of a young girl, whose quirk might be able to restore it to its full potential once again. And as of the last time we saw him, Aizawa was still using Erasure with the help of Monma's copy quirk. Something that of course leads us to believe that he will be one of the key players in the final arc, using his quirk to neutralize some of the most problematic opponents his students and colleagues will face. Number 4. Decay. Another villainous quirk with frighteningly immense potential is Tomura Shigaraki's Decay. But I really can't stress enough how big of a gap there is between the bottom 6 quirks and the top 4 in raw power, especially because Shigaraki's Decay in its latest form has yet to be beaten. Decay is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Anything Shigaraki touches turns to dust. Naturally, the way he discovered this quirk was pretty traumatizing, but that hasn't stopped him from using it to a dramatic effect as a villain. Though it can really only do one thing, Decay is one of the most dangerous quirks we have ever seen, even able to disintegrate people in a domino effect so long as Shigaraki is touching just one of them. Frankly, versatility isn't really needed for this quirk to rank among the most powerful in the series. And to make matters even worse for anyone Shigaraki faces, his quirk has evolved more than most others in the series. He used to require all 5 fingers to decay an object, but can now do it with less. And that was just a baby step. Shigaraki's body modification surgery increased Decay's power even more exponentially, allowing Shigaraki to turn 1/3 of a large city to dust. He is so powerful at this point that even being touched by a decaying piece of debris could kill a person. He even has enough control to spare his allies, even when decaying huge swaths of land. The amount of power he gained following Dr. Garaki's surgery is truly incredible. Frankly, Shigaraki is even more powerful than that now that he has All for One. But since this list is only looking at the power of the individual quirk, we have to separate the modifications from the quirk itself. The quirk on its own is easily formidable enough to reach the top 4 without body modification surgery or the addition of a second, even more powerful quirk. That said, its current and overwhelming strength is a little deceptive for the purpose of a list that only cares about quirks in their natural forms. Refinement by training is one thing, but the use of enhanced modifications is entirely another. Because Decay in its current form owes a lot of factors beyond the power at its base, I'm not going to place it any higher despite the fact that honestly, it could kill pretty much anything at this point. In a sense though, the fact that All for One chose Shigaraki to have this quirk enhanced through surgery and merging speaks to his potential on his own. Had Decay not been an immensely powerful quirk and Shigaraki not an immensely powerful combatant, it is unlikely that he would have received those power-ups in the first place. In light of that, it's good to remember that even before Decay was unbeatable, it was a force to be reckoned with. Number 3. Rewind. The number 3 quirk might be a rare mutation like Decay, but both its usage and its user couldn't be more different. Eri, the granddaughter of the Shiei Hasaikai's boss, has one of the more complicated abilities on this list called Rewind. And that name is probably the simplest description of what she can do, which is essentially reverting a person's body to a former state. Since Eri is only 7 years old and for most of her life considered her quirk a terrible curse due to the treatment she received from Chisaki, we haven't really seen Rewind in battle. But what it has done thus far speaks to the potential that tops almost any quirk in the series. One of the few things we know for sure about Rewind is that if Eri doesn't learn to control it, it is absolutely deadly. She discovered the quirk by rewinding her father so far back in time that she erased him from existence. And this was as a toddler. But it's also an incredibly helpful quirk to her allies. With no training whatsoever, she was able to continually heal Deku's injuries as he used his quirk at 100%, which normally broke his bones. And with only a little bit of training and very minimal time to recover from the trauma that made her so afraid of her quirk, she is able to restore Mirio Togata's Permeation quirk. Again, Eri is too young for us to see much of her quirk in combat, and I doubt that it's anywhere near its full potential at this point. Naturally then, she doesn't have the epic feats of quirk use under her belt that some of the other characters on this list do. But just based on what little we have seen, we can surmise that Rewind is a strong offensive and defensive quirk. Even without training, it is immensely powerful, and Eri is motivated to use it to help her friends. If she had as much time to train with her quirk as most of the other characters in the series have, it's hard to even imagine what she might have been capable of. She could be virtually immortal for one, since she could just rewind herself if she ever got injured, or even use her quirk to prevent herself from aging. And she'd be the ultimate ally, able to heal just about any injury and undo any battle-related handicap by rewinding her allies to their previous healthy states. And seeing as Aizawa is her primary caretaker, we might even see her return him to full health in time to help out the other heroes in their final confrontation with All For One and Shigaraki. The likelihood of that coming to fruition is up in the air, but it is still a possibility nonetheless. Honestly, given Eri's awful childhood, I kind of hope that she never has to use her quirk in battle. That ultimately depends on a lot of things beyond her control, and I don't know if it's realistic quite yet. But if she ever did end up putting Rewind to use in combat with proper training, it would likely prove itself to be one of the most powerful quirks we have ever seen. Number 2. New Order. It sounds preposterous to say that one of My Hero Academia's most powerful quirks only lasted its user 5 chapters after her introduction. It's a testament to the awakened Shigaraki's power that a quirk as hard to beat as the American hero Star and Stripes' New Order had such a short shelf life once he entered the picture. But there's more than a few reasons why its wielder was considered to be the strongest hero in the world. New Order allows Star and Stripe to make rules that govern anything she can touch and name out loud, an ability so versatile that it catches Tomura Shigaraki's eye as one worth stealing. She can only make 2 rules at a time, and always uses one of them to give herself superhuman strength. Now that definitely limits her, but with that one remaining rule, she can do just about anything she wants. Some examples we see in her brief time include stopping Shigaraki's heart, which only failed because his merger with All For One corrupted his sense of self, and growing to 1,000 times her size. Though the awakened Shigaraki isn't affected by her attacks, she is eventually able to make the quirks inside All For One revolt against him. And those are just a few things Star and Stripe can do with this jack-of-all-trades quirk. And yes, I know New Order loses the only fight it is ever in the series, but that in no way subtracts from its power. Remember, it is the reason that Star and Stripe was the world's top hero. And of course, its early defeat was very much tied to its narrative significance. Unveiled in a climactic fight with Shigaraki right before the manga's final arc begins, New Order feels more like a plot device than anything else, and that's probably why it is so insanely strong. It literally exists to show how unbeatable Shigaraki has become, and to that end, Horikoshi probably designed New Order to be as powerful as it possibly could be. But should a quirk like that be ranked below anything except the quirk that defeated it? I think not. Honorable mentions. Before we get into our number 1 quirk, I wanted to point out a few that nearly made this list but couldn't quite edge out the top 10. Shoto Todoroki's half cold, half hot, a half ice, half fire quirk was a strong contender, but ultimately wasn't able to make the cut due to its lack of versatility. Fumikage Tokoyami's Dark Shadow is a powerful and adaptable quirk, but lacked the raw power of some of the others on this list. I also considered 13's Black Hole, but concluded that it wasn't a good fit because at full power, it's just too hard to control. And finally, Twice's double quirk had massive potential, but didn't make the list as it wasn't enough to prevent his own untimely death. Number 1. One for All, and All For One. Come on, I'm pretty sure you all saw this one coming. But the battle between All For One, a quirk that can steal and transfer other quirks, and One For All, a transferable power stockpiling quirk, is at the heart of My Hero Academia, and I couldn't end this list any other way. The original wielders of All For One and One For All were a pair of brothers. The younger brother, Yoichi, was seemingly quirkless, while the other had the ability to steal other quirks. The quirk-stealing brother, who we now know as All For One, gave Yoichi a power stockpiling quirk. What he didn't know when he did that was that Yoichi wasn't actually quirkless. Yoichi's quirk was transferability, which combined with his new stockpiler quirk allowed him to pass his quirk on to whomever he chose. Thanks to his quirk stockpiling ability, each inheritor gained access to the past user's quirks. Thus, while One For All continued to be refined as it was passed on to new users, it became more powerful with each new quirk it attained. As a result of its immense power, All For One has ceaselessly pursued the quirk, hoping to steal it. However, in his weakened current state, he has passed on the work and his quirk to a successor, none other than Tomura Shigaraki. Giving All For One to Shigaraki, who's in much more combat-ready form, is his last-ditch gamble to steal the quirk. In the meantime, One For All stockpiled 8 quirks, which have now been inherited by current user, Deku. Among those are the 7th wielder Shimura Nana's levitation quirk Float, 4th user Hikage Shinomori's predictive quirk Danger Sense, and the unnamed 3rd user's Fajin, which can store kinetic energy from repeated movement to be released later. Then you have things like Black Whip, Smokescreen, and even the unnamed 2nd user's secretive quirk. Deku is also able to speak to the former One For All wielders, whose consciousness now resides within the quirk itself, tapping into the collective knowledge and experience of 8 generations of wielders. But One For All isn't the only one with an impressive collection of quirks to show for its long history. Quirks that All For One has stolen over the years include former hero Ragdoll's Search quirk, a Life Force quirk which artificially lengthens its lifespan, a Warping quirk similar to, yet less than, Korigiri's, Star and Stripes New Order, though that one didn't go so well, and so on. That ability to combine multiple quirks within a single ability is great on its own, but what truly makes these 2 quirks stand above the rest, aside from their central role in the story, is their shared history and the remnants of their previous users that remain within them. Without the constant push and pull of All For One's quest to dominate a resilient One For All, there would be no My Hero Academia to speak of, and that importance is reflective in their power. Neither of these quirks have ever fully been defeated, and there's little doubt that theirs will be the climactic face-off that determines the ending of the series. That said, it felt very wrong to assign one or the other to the top spot alone, because we don't know yet which one is going to come out on top. But there's very little doubt either way that these 2 quirks reign supreme. So how could I give the nod to one over the other just yet? And after all this build-up, where's the suspense in that? This has been our list of the top 10 strongest quirks in My Hero Academia. If you agree or disagree, let us know in the comments. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.